Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Let's talk about the one thing that's been secretly holding you back without you even realizing it.
You don't become someone new after divorce. You become someone you've been protecting for years. And if you're standing on the other side of separation right now, quietly wondering who you even are anymore, you're not lost. You're just finally meeting her. There's this strange thing that happens in the months after divorce. You wake up, and the house is quiet. Not peaceful quiet, just empty quiet. And somewhere in that silence, you realize you've been waiting for something. For the relief to feel bigger. For the clarity to feel cleaner. For the version of yourself you thought would show up once you finally left. To actually arrive, but she's not here yet. Instead, you're sitting with someone you barely recognize. Someone who looks like you, but feels hollowed out. Someone who's free, technically, but doesn't know what to do with freedom because she spent so many years managing his mood, protecting his comfort, trying to be the right amount of everything so he wouldn't pull away. Maybe you've noticed how you still wake up tense, how you still track time the way you used to, wondering if you're doing enough, wondering if you're allowed to rest, wondering if choosing yourself was selfish, even though you know logically it wasn't. There's this moment, maybe in the car, maybe folding laundry, where you catch yourself feeling guilty for being alone, guilty for not being sadder, or guilty for being too sad, guilty for taking up space in your own life. And here's the part no one talks about. The guilt isn't about him, it's about her. The woman you were before you learned to shrink. You're mourning her, not the marriage. Her, the one who used to laugh without checking the room first. The one who had opinions she didn't soften. The one who knew what she wanted before she spent years translating herself into someone easier to love. You've been holding her for so long, protecting her, apologizing for her, quietly putting her away every time she tried to surface. Because surfacing meant conflict, and conflict meant distance, and distance felt like death. So you stayed small, you stayed manageable. And now that the marriage is over, you're standing in this strange in-between space where you're supposed to feel free. But instead you just feel uncertain. Because the woman you were in that marriage, she's gone. But the woman you're becoming, you don't know her yet. And that's terrifying. There are these small moments that reveal it. Like when you at the grocery store and you realize you don't know what you actually like to eat anymore. Because for years, you bought what he liked. You cooked what he wanted. You arranged your appetite around his preferences. Or when someone asks you a simple question, what do you want to do this weekend? And you freeze. Because you've spent so long answering that question based on what would keep the peace, what would make him happy, what would avoid disappointment. You've forgotten how to answer for yourself. And it's not just the big decisions. It's the small ones too. What music to play in the car. What show to watch at night. Whether to stay up late or go to bed early. Whether to say yes or no without weighing how it will affect someone who is no longer even there. You're learning how to exist without an audience you're constantly performing for. And some days, that feels liberating. Other days it feels like standing in an empty theater, waiting for applause that's never coming. Because even though he's gone, the habit of seeking his approval hasn't left yet. You still catch yourself explaining your choices to no one, justifying your decisions in your head, rehearsing conversations with ghosts. And underneath all of that is this quiet, persistent question. Who am I? But I'm not trying to be enough for someone. Let that sit for a moment. Here's what most women don't realize in the aftermath of divorce. You didn't lose yourself in the marriage. You deposited yourself there, piece by piece, year by year. Every time you chose peace over truth. Every time you absorbed his frustration, so it wouldn't turn into a fight. Every time you made yourself smaller, so the relationship could feel bigger. You weren't weak. You were adapting. And adaptation, when it's one-sided, looks a lot like disappearance. There's a psychological pattern that happens in relationships where emotional reciprocity is missing. It's not always dramatic. It's not always cruel. Sometimes it's just absent. He's not necessarily a villain. He might have loved you in the way he understood love. But love without presence is just companionship. And companionship without emotional investment is just cohabitation. And you can't build a self inside cohabitation. So what happens is this. You start outsourcing your identity to the relationship. You start measuring your worth by how well you can hold things together, how little you need, how easy you are to be with. And every time you succeed at being low maintenance, you reinforce a very quiet, very dangerous belief. My needs are the problem, so you stop having them. Not consciously. You don't wake up one day and decide to abandon yourself. You just start adjusting, recalibrating. You tell yourself you're being mature, flexible, understanding. But what you're actually doing is building a version of yourself that's tolerable to someone who isn't fully present. And that version? She's exhausting to maintain. Because she's not real. She's a performance. A very convincing one. So convincing that even you started to believe she was who you were supposed to be. But here's the truth. The woman you became in that marriage wasn't you. She was the best possible version of you under impossible emotional conditions. And now that those conditions are gone, she doesn't know how to exist. That's why you feel so unmoored right now. Not because you made the wrong choice, but because the infrastructure you built your identity on no longer exists. And this is where the real confusion starts. Because divorce doesn't just end a relationship. It ends the role you were playing. The one you perfected. The one that gave you purpose, even if that purpose was just keeping everything from falling apart. And when that role is gone, you re-left with this question. Who am I when I'm not trying to be enough for someone who is not really here? That question, that's not confusion. That's clarity starting to surface. But let me explain something about how this pattern actually forms. Because it didn't start with him. Most women who end up in emotionally unreciprocated marriages learned very early that their value was conditional. That love was something you earned through service, through accommodation, through being agreeable. Maybe you grew up in a home where your needs were secondary, where speaking up caused tension, where being easy to deal with meant being loved. So you learned to read rooms, to anticipate needs, to make yourself useful so you'd be wanted. And that skill, it followed you into adulthood. It showed up in your friendships, in your career, in your romantic relationships. You became very good at figuring out what people needed from you and delivering it before they even asked. And for a while, that worked. It made you valuable, reliable, the one people could count on. But somewhere along the way, you started to confuse being useful with being loved. You started to believe that if you could just anticipate his needs perfectly, if you could just manage the household flawlessly, if you could just be the right amount of present without being needy, then he would see you. But here's what actually happened. The more you gave, the more invisible you became. Because when someone doesn't have to consider your needs, they stop seeing you as a person with needs. You become part of the infrastructure. Like running water or electricity, expected, functional, noticed only when absent. And the tragedy is that you interpreted his lack of presence as evidence that you needed to try harder. You thought, if I'm feeling this alone, it must mean I'm not doing enough. So you did more. You managed more. You carried more. You forgave more. You explained less. You needed less. And with every adjustment, you moved further away from yourself. Until one day you woke up and realized you've been living with someone for years who doesn't actually know you. Because you stopped showing him who you were. Not because you were hiding, but because every time you tried to surface, the relationship felt unstable. So you learned to stay submerged. And now that the marriage is over, you're trying to resurface. But you've been underwater for so long that breathing feels unfamiliar. Maybe you've felt this. The disorientation of being alone without being lonely for the first time in years. Because loneliness in marriage is different than loneliness after divorce. In marriage, loneliness is active. It's a constant negotiation. A constant hope that today will be different. That he'll ask the right question. That he'll notice you're struggling. That he'll reach for you first. But loneliness after divorce? It's quiet. There's no one to hope toward, no one to wait for, no one to be disappointed by. And strangely, that absence of disappointment feels like relief. Not happiness, not yet, but relief. The kind of relief that comes from finally putting down something heavy you didn't realize you were carrying. And here, as what most women do and realize is happening in this phase, you're not recovering from the marriage. You're recovering from the version of yourself you had to become to survive it. But clarity doesn't feel clean, does it? Because even though you know, logically, that leaving was right, there's still this voice. The one that whispers late at night when you're alone. Did I try hard enough? What if I gave up too soon? What if I'm the reason it didn't work? Let's talk about that voice for a moment. Because it's not doubt, it's grief. You're not questioning whether you should have stayed. You're grieving the version of the relationship you kept hoping would appear. The one where he saw you. Where your effort was met with effort. Where love felt like partnership, not project management. You tried. God, you tried. You tried by staying longer than you wanted to. You tried by explaining yourself more gently. You tried by lowering your expectations so far that you started to disappear beneath them. And even now, after everything, part of you still wonders if you could have tried differently. But here is what that question is really asking. Could I have made myself smaller in a way that would have worked? And the answer is no. Because the problem was never the size of your needs. The problem was that you were the only one trying to meet them. Let me tell you what trying actually looked like in that marriage. Trying was the night you stayed up rehearsing how to ask for more connection without sounding needy. Trying was the way you learned to cry silently in the bathroom so he wouldn't feel burdened. Trying was how you justified his distance by listing all the ways he was stressed, overwhelmed, dealing with his own things. Trying was the way you convinced yourself that if you could just be patient enough, understanding enough, low maintenance enough, eventually he'd have the space to see you. But patience without reciprocity isn't love. It's self-erasure. And understanding without being understood isn't empathy. It's loneliness with better packaging. You didn't give up. You woke up. And waking up after years of sleep feels disorienting. There's also this other fear, isn't there? The one about judgment. What people will think. What they'll say. Whether they'll see you as the woman who gave up. The one who couldn't make it work. The one who walked away from a marriage that looked fine from the outside. You can feel their questions, even when they don't ask them. But he wasn't abusive, right? Did you try counseling? What about the kids? Couldn't you have just accepted that this is what marriage is? And every one of those questions carries the same hidden message. Your unhappiness wasn't enough of a reason. But here's what those questions misunderstand. Emotional neglect doesn't leave visible marks. It doesn't give you bruises you can photograph or incidents you can report. It just erodes you slowly, quietly, until one day you look in the mirror and don't recognize the woman staring back. And the people asking those questions, they haven't lived in the silence you lived in. They haven't felt what it's like to lie next to someone every night and feel completely alone. They haven't experienced the particular kind of heartbreak that comes from being married to someone who is physically present, but emotionally absent. So when they ask if you tried hard enough, what they're really asking is, was your pain visible enough to justify leaving? And the answer is, your pain doesn't need to be visible to be valid. Unhappiness is not a small thing. Emotional loneliness is not a small thing. Living with someone who makes you feel invisible is not a small thing. And choosing to leave a relationship that was erasing you is not giving up. It's waking up. Maybe you're also afraid of regret. Afraid that one day you'll look back and realize you left too soon. That you threw away something that could have been saved. That you'll see older couples holding hands in the park and wonder if that could have been you, if you just held on a little longer. But here's what I need you to understand. Regret doesn't come from leaving. Regret comes from staying in a place where your presence doesn't matter. Regret comes from spending years trying to earn love from someone who isn't capable of giving it in the way you need it. Regret comes from abandoning yourself over and over because you were taught that sacrifice equals love. And if there's one thing you won't regret, it's choosing to stop abandoning yourself. You might grieve the marriage. You might grieve the life you thought you'd have. You might grieve the version of him you hoped would show up, but you won't regret choosing yourself. Because choosing yourself is the thing that stops the regret from accumulating. So let's reframe this, because the story you've been telling yourself about divorce needs to change. Divorce is not failure. Divorce is the consequence of awareness. You didn't leave because you gave up. You left because you finally understood that trying harder was just another way of disappearing. And that's not weakness. That's self-respect waking up after years of being sedated by hope. There is a difference between giving up on a marriage and giving up on the version of yourself that was dying inside it. You didn't quit. You divested from an emotional economy that only you were funding. And yes, that's painful, because divestment always is, especially when you've been investing for years, especially when you believed that if you just gave a little more, it would finally be enough. But it was never going to be enough. Not because you weren't worthy of love, but because he wasn't present enough to give it. And the woman you're becoming now, the one you're meeting in this quiet, uncertain space, she's not a stranger. She's the part of you that's been waiting. The part you protected by keeping her hidden. The part that knew, long before you were ready to admit it, that you couldn't stay. She's been here the whole time, and she's not broken. She's not damaged. She's not bitter. She's just tired of pretending. And now, for the first time in years, she doesn't have to. You're not starting over. You're not rebuilding from scratch. You're excavating, pulling away the layers of who you had to be so you can remember who you've always been underneath. And that woman? She's stronger than you think. Not because she survived the marriage, but because she had the clarity to leave it. She knew her presence mattered, even when he acted like it didn't. She knew her needs were valid, even when meeting them felt impossible. She knew that love isn't supposed to feel like constant translation, and she chose herself anyway. That's not selfishness. That's dignity. And dignity, after years of self-abandonment, feels like coming home. Let me tell you what reclaiming yourself actually looks like, because it's not what the Instagram posts suggest. It's not bubble baths and affirmations, and suddenly feeling whole. It's messier than that. Some days you wake up and feel powerful, clear, certain that you made the right choice. Other days you wake up and feel unmoored, like you're floating in open water with no shore in sight. And both of those experiences are real. Both of those experiences are part of the process. Because you're not just healing from a marriage. You're unlearning patterns that have been with you since childhood. You're questioning beliefs about love that you've held as truth for decades. You're rebuilding a sense of self that was constructed around someone else's presence. And that takes time. Not because you're slow, not because you're broken, but because what you're doing is profound. You're learning to distinguish between who you are and who you became to be loved. And that's not a quick process. It's a daily practice of noticing. Noticing when you're people-pleasing out of habit instead of genuine desire. Noticing when you're shrinking to make someone else comfortable. Noticing when you're apologizing for taking up space. And then, gently choosing differently. Not perfectly, not all at once, but incrementally. One small choice at a time. Saying no without over-explaining. Sharing an opinion without softening it first. Asking for what you need without apologizing for needing it. These moments feel revolutionary because for so long they were forbidden. And each time you choose yourself, you're reinforcing a new belief. My presence matters. My needs are valid. My voice deserves to be heard. Not because someone else validates them, but because you do. And here's what starts to happen as you practice this. The guilt begins to fade. Not all at once, but gradually. You start to notice that choosing yourself doesn't actually harm anyone. That setting boundaries doesn't make you cruel. That having needs doesn't make you difficult. And slowly, the woman you're becoming starts to feel less like a stranger and more like someone you've always known. Someone who was there before you learned to disappear. Someone who's been waiting patiently for you to remember her. And when you finally do, when you finally see her clearly, you realize something. She never left. You did. And coming back to her? That's not recovery. That's reunion. So if you're standing here now, in this strange space after divorce, wondering who you are without him, you're not lost. You're just unlearning. Unlearning the belief that your worth is tied to how well you can make someone stay. Unlearning the idea that needing more than crumbs makes you difficult. Unlearning the habit of shrinking so someone else can feel bigger. And in that unlearning, you're meeting someone. The woman who's been waiting for you to choose her. The one who's been quietly holding your truth while you figured out how to speak it. She's here now, and she's not asking you to be perfect. She's not asking you to have it all figured out. She's just asking you to stop apologizing for taking up space in your own life. This moment, this uncertainty, this quiet rebuilding, it's not the aftermath of failure. It's the beginning of recognizing yourself again. And that recognition doesn't happen all at once. It happens in glimpses. In the moment you laugh without monitoring who's listening. In the decision you make without consulting a ghost. In the boundary you set without collapsing under guilt. In the morning, you wake up and realize you haven't thought about him in hours. These moments are small, but they're evidence. Evidence that you're coming back to yourself. Evidence that the woman you're becoming isn't someone new. She's someone you've always been. And she's not waiting for permission anymore. Not from him. Not from anyone. She's here, present, taking up space. And she's learning slowly that taking up space isn't something to apologize for. It's something to honor, because her presence matters. Her voice matters. Her needs matter. And the life she's building now, the one that's hers alone, matters. Not because it's perfect. Not because it's figured out. But because it's real. And real, after years of performance, feels like freedom. If this felt true, if something in this resonated with what you've been carrying silently, there's more we need to talk about. Because the woman you're becoming after divorce isn't just recovering. She's reclaiming. And that process? It's worth understanding deeply. I'll be here when you're ready.